Content warning for murder, rape, homophobia, and mutilation. Action, excitement, horror, romance, thrills and chills, swords and sorcery, rockets and ray guns, a dizzying panoply of the strange and impossible from the darkest depths of the human imagination. What mad universe encompasses such tales as these? Join us as we bear witness to the sweeping sprawl of all the history that never was and all the futures that could yet be. It's adventure as you like it on What Mad Universe? The 70s were almost over. The age of free love and flower power long past. The Vietnam War and Watergate had come and gone. Divorce rates and drug use were skyrocketing. Corporations were consolidating their grasp on the global economy, and even as the Cold War continued to stretch out with no end in sight, geopolitics seemed to be getting increasingly unstable, with brushfire wars sweeping through developing nations, and terrorism the new threat. The world seemed to be on the brink of collapse. In Los Angeles, terrorists seized control of a corporate-owned skyscraper in the middle of a Christmas party. Things look grim, but there's something the bad guys don't know. A lone man with police training was in from out of town, hoping to reconcile with a loved one, and he was able to slip out when the shooting started. Now one man has to take on a terrorist cadre all by himself. That man's name is Joe Leland? Well, yippee-ki-yay, mother fudger. Hello, everyone. Welcome to What Mad Universe, the tough-talking, hard-shooting podcast. I'm Adam Prosser. With me, as always, is Philip Rice.
Hello.
Hello, Phil. Today, we're talking about a book from quite a bit later in time than what we usually look at. A lot of what we focus on is 19th and early 20th century stuff. But we're looking at a book from 1970, published in 1979, and it's called Nothing Lasts Forever. But the reason it's significant...
By Roderick Thorp.
By Roderick Thorp, yeah. And the reason people know it, though, or the reason it will have an impact on people, though, is that it was adapted into a movie in 1988 that you may have heard of called Die Hard. So we thought that would be kind of interesting to have a look at that one. Just to see, obviously, the differences, because Die Hard has made a huge impact on on pop culture and
everything.
The movies. Yeah. So to prepare now, the interesting thing about Nothing Lasts Forever is that it is a sequel, and thanks to Phil, we have sort of managed to see the book to which it was a sequel, which was called The Detective, and it featured Joe Leland. He was the star.
It was from the late 60s, right?
Right. It was 1966. Joe Leland was the star of the novel, 1966. It was, as I say, as Phil said, by Roderick Thorp. It was just called The Detective. It was a very slow-paced, character-driven, and introspective novel without any real action. And it was adapted into a movie starring Frank Sinatra in 1968. So, yeah, what did you think of the movie, Phil?
The detective movie?
The Detective, yeah. Let's just talk about The Detective first.
Yeah, because I didn't read the book because I didn't have time. It's very long.
Yes, it is. And believe
Adam
me,
said I didn't really have to, so I didn't.
Not only did he not have to, but he should not have, because it is not a good book, in my opinion.
I actually thought the movie was okay. It's not the best thing in the world, but it had it flowed well, but I can't see how it would have been made into, or how it could have worked as a 500-page novel. It just doesn't have enough story for that.
I mean, No, well, that is exactly it. And please understand, it's a 500-page novel with very small type.
Yeah, it's tiny type.
Tiny type. Compared to it, Nothing Lasts Forever is probably a quarter of the length, if that, because it's like 200 pages large type versus 500 pages very small type. It's very meditative. So apparently Roderick Thorpe actually did work as a private eye. Ironically, Joe Leland, the main character, is not actually a private eye in the book. Now, I know this will probably be different from the movie for you. He's an insurance investigator in the book. Um,
Oh,
yeah, and he was an ex-cop who left the force over uh, the the case which they portray in the movie as more or less the meat of the plot in the movie. So that's why it's a little strange.
huh.
The Yeah, the movie is essentially all the highlighted the Princess Bride esque highlighted good parts of the book. The book is very much I mean, I without having read a lot of '60s social realism character novels, I feel like that's what the book is. It's very much about Joe Leland and his wife and their relationship, and while they don't emphasize it, it's about him adapting because he's a World War II veteran who shot down a bunch of. He was an air ace actually. He shot down a bunch of Nazi planes. He's got this great track record in the war. But while he was doing that, his wife was off cheating on him, and they couldn't really reconcile after the war when he came back home. But they're still sort of together, but also sort of not. So a very similar relationship to what John McClane has with his wife in Die Hard, actually, for different reasons. But yeah, the book is very, very. It goes in. It spends at least 100, possibly 200 pages on Joe Leland and his wife and their relationship, and it's crafted realistically, I guess. Like it's done in a way that, yeah, I can believe this was a real relationship that these people had, because she's portrayed as being somewhat having sort of mental issues. Essentially, his wife, she was. He sort of hints that she's a nymphomaniac. She just couldn't be alone, so she had to cheat on, but she still loves him, and so it's very much in about their. It's not a very pulpy novel at all. It's very much a quote literary novel unquote. Um, but then the movie with Sinatra is very much it's focused on the procedural
Yeah,
aspect
it
of the
it's
case, which
well, it was
is
described as a neo noir, so it sort of feels like a '70s take on film noir.
yeah, it is. It's a well '60s because even the movie was '68.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and I it's interesting because film wise, that would have come sort of right as like Bonnie and Clyde was in theaters the year before. So and that's often pointed to as a movie that started really blowing away uh, the conventions of film and turning them into a new style. So you could almost argue that the Sinatra movie is very, very, very last gasp of the traditional film noir. It's him in a fedora and
Uh,
being a detective.
yeah, in some ways, it does have gay characters in it, and
Yeah,
like not like very
not
clearly
positively.
gay, like explicitly called gay.
Yeah,
Not not subtly hinted at, like in say the Maltese Falcon.
right.
Peter
Well, to
Lorre's
be.
character is
Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, Peter Lorre's character is hinted at to be gay
Right.
through various homophobic sort of
Mm-hmm.
innuendo.
Yeah.
But in this, the characters are gay. Now,
Sorry, I actually just
oh,
want to
we'll
mention
talk about
something
that.
quick,
Yeah.
just very quickly. In the actual Raymond Chandler novels, I've read a couple of them. He does actually, like, he's not afraid to say, yeah, a character's gay in the novels. But it's just the
Mm.
movies you would never hear them say that,
Yeah,
basically.
because there was code things and whatnot.
Right, right. It was an issue. And of course, Chandler always portrays it, much as it's portrayed here, actually, as kind of, oh, society, what's society coming to? It's not a, it's homophobic, unfortunately. It's, and
The
it,
movie struck me as really dated in that regard, but
right.
it felt like its heart was in the right place. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
well, go ahead, sorry.
there's a scene where a bunch of gay people are caught having public sex by the police, and one of the cops is really homophobic to them, and Leland is
Hmm.
not happy with that.
Right, yeah. that is getting into. I think you had something else you wanted to talk about, but yeah, that is getting into the weird politics of both this and Nothing Lasts Forever, because they're
Yeah.
not written. They're not Mike Hammer, Mickey Spillane type books where we got to be, or for a modern audience, Frank Miller, where you got to be the toughest of tough guys, and this city is so corrupt and blah blah blah, and I hate everyone. It's all the immigrants and the homosexuals and the but like it's really toxic masculinity. He's fighting it in the book and in the movie as well. Like you can see he's like trying to be a good guy and be like a if not a full on liberal guy, at least not a arch conservative reactionary guy at least.
Yeah, there's a scene where one of the other cops has strips a suspect naked,
Hmm.
and when Leland asks him why, he says it's a good technique to make them feel vulnerable. I saw it in a picture of German concentration camps, and that sets Leland off, and he
Yeah,
threatens the cop, and
yeah.
yeah, that struck me as interesting.
Yeah, both the book and the movie, they're very emphatic on the fact that Leland is like they specifically talk about him in the detective being a Democrat, and then in Nothing Lasts Forever, as you've mentioned, they talk about him hating Nixon. Um,
Yeah, they call Nixon an asshole,
yeah,
so that's a thing.
well, but then on the other hand, this was around the time that the two political parties were had a real identity crisis as to what they represented. And so, being a Democrat doesn't necessarily mean he'd be this liberal guy either, right? The
Yeah,
old school,
but it was around the time when the Southern Strategy was being first implemented, right?
right?
The
Well,
first book.
yeah. Well, the first book was actually right around the time that the old school, like essentially, LBJ was to drastically oversimplify, LBJ lost the Southern Democrats, who had been like a reliable bloc, just like the South is, more or less a reliable bloc for Republican politicians nowadays. It was always a reliable bloc for the Democrats. Back up until that point, and LBJ he actually did drag his feet a bit on things like the Civil Rights Act because he knew he was going to lose these people. They went ahead and did it anyway, and those people were picked up by the Republicans because of the Southern strategy. But at the same time,
Which is sort of dog whistling,
right,
not outright saying, we're gonna we're gonna be for segregation or whatnot, but sort of subtly hinting at it with phrases like states' rights or force
right.
busing or that sort of thing.
Yeah, as we've seen, it's been amplified in recent years where the guy who was the campaign strategist went out and flat out said, yeah, well, we were trying to pick up all these racists in the South without flat out saying it, but
Oh
we
yeah,
appealed to them.
that campaign strategist. Oh, what's his Lee whatever Lee Atwater.
Atwater, yeah.
Yeah, he was recorded, and he didn't publicly admit it. He didn't know that recording would be released to the public. He thought it was a private thing.
Right.
He actually said, "Don't quote me on this" before he says it.
Yeah.
But
Right.
they
But
released it anyway,
and
yeah,
there were actually other Republicans who mentioned it later as well, and
yeah,
they actually spoke to journalists about it, so it was a little more open later on. But I
yeah.
mean,
But now it's being decried as a conspiracy theory by
right.
Republicans.
Yes. Well,
Like
yes. Anyway,
it clearly happened. Like,
but I mean, if you know about the 1968 Democratic Conference, which I'm not gonna I don't know that much about, but it was seen as this sort of breaking point where the party was in huge turmoil, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So I mean, right up till Nixon was taken out of office, it was sometimes seen as you could be a liberal Republican or a very conservative Democrat, because even up to the LBJ era, there were also like northeastern Democrats and coastal Democrats who were, essentially as we think of them today, but they were sort of palling in with the Southern Democrats who were the pre-Civil War era thinkers, basically. So
and on the other hand, there was like the Rockefeller Republicans who were more on the liberal side of things.
right, exactly, and even Nixon, believe it or not, he kind of people didn't know quite how to pin down Nixon, and he's pretty conservative, but people thought like he basically hinted at he was going to end the Vietnam War, so it was like we associate that with those warmongering Republicans, but in Nixon's era, it was kind of like, no, it was the warmongering Democrats, because it really was the Democrats who started the Vietnam War, and I'm going to get us out of it, basically. And then he made it worse. But anyway, so the point is there was a lot of political turmoil at the time, and both in the first book, and then Nothing Lasts Forever is sort of coming out of a decade and a half of just absolute chaos politically in America, or so it seemed to people at the time. And it's interesting.
And as we'll,
Go ahead.
sorry, as we'll get to, Die Hard came out at the end of the '80s,
Right.
which was firmly in Reaganite era, and
Right.
it really reflects those themes in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Yeah. It's actually it's very interesting because you can look at the Detective the book, the Detective the movie, Nothing Lasts Forever, and Die Hard, and they're all very much portraits of a certain political era. And if it seems like we're talking about politics a lot, believe me, the books, especially Nothing Lasts Forever, bring up the politics very strongly. They don't shy
Yeah.
away from talking about the politics of the era that they're in. Um, the first book, like I said, the detective has a certain placidity to it, even though it's noir. Like, it does really talk about, like, oh, society's really crumbling, and like it really lingers, especially in the early pages, on some brutal crimes, on like a kid who's been kidnapped and had horrible things done to her.
And
And
and the central mystery of the movie is a gay man who gets his penis cut off.
yes, it's a very brutal crime, uh, inflicted on a guy in a part of town that they paint as, oh, this is the corrupt, horrible town, part of town that. Uh, and again, he's got this, he both the Thorpe, the author, and Leland, the character, come at it from this very conflicted point of view, where you can tell they're trying to have a liberal viewpoint at it, but they're also like, but the scum is, mucking up this part of town, and so it's not what we would call very enlightened, but at the same time, he's trying to have a nice attitude, I guess. But I mean, the
Yeah, sort of a weird balance between liberal and like full on
yeah.
taxi driver.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's got you can see the sort of seeds of Taxi Driver, Death Wish, the whole 70s, Dirty Harry, that the whole late 60s, 70s, ultra macho, lone man. It's associated with
Although
the.
taxi driver is a criticism of that.
Yeah,
But
that's
anyway,
right. Yeah. Well, the mindset that, and I mean, Death
yeah,
Wish was originally as a book, criticizing it as well, and then it became a movie that basically glorified that whole mindset as well of
yeah,
the
yeah.
vigilante.
Oh, and a lot of people don't take the right messages from taxi driver. So
Right, exactly. It's one of these things where, to portray it, unfortunately, can end up glorifying it almost without intending
yeah,
to. And Scorsese is, of course, particularly focused on not necessarily, condemning it, but it happens. It happens anyway. But definitely, there is a period in pop culture where, leading all the way into the 80s, but in the late 60s and the 70s, there's kind of a righteous anger of, oh, what's happening in our society, and it's not necessarily coming from, you know guys with, insecure guys who want to wield guns at each other necessarily. And that's portrayed in this book, I think. But then by the 80s, it is literally just a cowboy fantasy of being able to gun down the bad guys, the Reagan era. It's something Reagan probably tapped into to a certain extent as a politician,
yeah.
unfortunately. Um, but it is interesting, like I say, because this is definitely a guy who kind of wants you to know that he's not a meathead, a violent reactionary, the bad guys. The 66 novel, like I say, it's got a very much almost a Revolutionary Road feel, where it's, the tragedy of people's home lives as well as being a case. But Nothing Lasts Forever is a very, very, uh, very tight book. It's gets right to the action. It,
We should talk about how it came to be first, shouldn't we?
yeah.
Yeah. So uh, apparently in '75, Roderick Thorpe saw the Towering Inferno, the Charlton Heston movie,
Hmm.
uh, which is about a skyscraper that catches on fire. And that night he had a dream about a man being chased through a skyscraper by men with guns. And he decided that since they had made a movie out of the detective, that this pretty cool idea could be a sequel to that book, so that Frank Sinatra could star in the sequel. And uh, yeah, that didn't come about. Frank Sinatra ended up turning it down quite early,
Hmm.
and it was shopped around for 10 years, almost 10 years. Schwarzenegger turned it down, Sylvester Stallone turned it down, and finally Bruce Willis signed on,
Right.
and the rest is history. Because those two not would have not worked for that movie,
Well, I could. Did you?
or at least the movie that came to be.
Right. Well, I could
Like
almost see
the idea
Stallone.
is he's sort of an everyman, and
Right.
Schwarzenegger has played everyman before, but
Not
come on,
well. It's
yeah.
almost a joke in True Lies that he's just a regular everyman. Actually, it's almost more of a joke in
And Total
Total
Recall as
Recall.
well. Like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm just a normal person living my life. What? I'm an action hero. Who would have expected it?
yeah.
Stallone could
It,
have.
it doesn't really like. I like Total Recall a lot, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the idea that Schwarzenegger, this huge like Titanic man, is just a normal construction worker, and he has to have special stuff done to him to make him into a spy is a little bit far fetched.
Well, I mean, it's a Paul Verhoeven movie. He clearly knew it was he
Yeah,
parodizes action movies, right? So that's essentially what he's
yeah.
doing
No,
there.
no,
But
it's a very good movie.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of
Yeah,
funny.
but no, but I mean, he knew that was a joke. I think when he did it, like I think he
Fair
knew
enough. Yeah.
that was kind of ridiculous. And then 5 years later, James Cameron did it with True Lies, and maybe he wasn't as aware of how ridiculous it was. So it's a little hard to say, but maybe he was. Who knows? Anyway, but Stallone could have pulled it off though. The version of Die Hard that we got, because he was.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that all through the '80s he was this hardcore badass,
But
uber
yeah,
macho guy.
He was Rocky as well.
That's
So
right. When he started off, he was basically the everyman figure who could rise to great heights. So if he had no career between Rocky and the late '80s, he could have done Die Hard because his mindset would have been we would have seen him as just a regular guy trying to make good, basically. But um,
hmm
and
But Bruce Willis really makes the movie. I
oh,
think
of course, yeah,
him and Alan Rickman and other,
right.
the director obviously, but Bruce Willis is a big part of why that movie works.
Right. And it's important to remember Bruce Willis, that I believe was his first real big movie breakthrough. Like he was on Moonlighting.
Yeah, he was on TV.
Right. But and Moonlighting, I mean, sure, he's a bit of that's kind of got a noir aspect to it as well, but it's a TV show and it's very heavy on the romance and stuff. So it was a little bit I'm not going to say it was shocking to see Bruce Willis do an action movie in 1988, but it wasn't the fact that there was a contrast between him and Arnold Schwarzenegger is part of what makes the movie work. It's funny because looking back on it, it feels like an '80s meathead action movie, but it was actually an attempt to kind of move away from meathead '80s action movies at the time.
Yeah, he's very not introspective. He's very motor mouthed, I guess. He's
Right.
talking about his feelings all the time.
Yeah, and he's
What he's going through.
right, and he's
And the book actually is sort of not like that in some ways. Like he's very methodical in the book, but we hear his inner monologue.
Yeah, just so having said that, let's go back to the book for a second. In Nothing Lasts Forever, it's he's Joe Leland has he's not a cop. He's now been
A police consultant.
yeah, he left the force in The Detective. He wasn't even on the force in The Detective. He was an insurance investigator. Now he's a consultant. He actually goes to like security conferences and stuff. He's a security expert, basically.
And anti-terrorism stuff.
Right.
In the book, he actually knows who Gruber is when
right,
he sees him.
right, because he's been to
He recognizes him
conferences
from a lecture. Yeah.
right, and Gruber is a known international terrorist. He's
It's Tony Gruber.
right. Little Tony the Red is the character in the book. He's and it should be noted it's funny when reading the book how it actually does adhere, or the movie does adhere to the book very closely in some ways. All the big set pieces you can think of from the book or from the movie are in the book, but there are a couple of very major changes, and one of them is that the terrorists are actually terrorists in the book. They're not pretending to be terrorists to break into this vault.
And they actually have a pretty strong point.
Yeah,
we'll get to that later.
Well, that's exactly it. Let's talk about it right now because again, in the book has kind of a sour feeling in some ways. Again, as I said, you have the sense of a guy who you read The Detective and it's a guy who's trying to be a good man in a harsh world, and you get to Nothing Lasts Forever, and it's kind of like, American society is crumbling, everything's going to hell, and he holds up Nixon, he holds up authoritarian jerkwads and police corruption and things. So he's not doing this as a right wing reactionary vigilante thing, but he does have this. He's very much plays up the idea that, oh yeah, these terrorists and anarchists are everywhere and they're going to take over and destroy our society. It's important to remember in the 70s there were a couple of big, well, there were a number of different things, but there was a big terrorist. There were a couple of big terrorist attacks, and terror cells, I guess, became a little more common in the American psyche, starting with probably the Weather Underground. I think one of the things that they were probably drawing on for this was the Symbionese Liberation Army, who are the people who kidnapped Patty Hearst. Are you familiar with that
Oh,
film?
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know their name, but yeah.
Actually, they were a group of. They were supposedly, kind of a very, very militant black liberation group, but by the time they started becoming radicalized and doing really brutal stuff, they only had one black member who was the leader, and everyone else was white, and a lot of them were women. And they kidnapped Patty Hearst, who was the heir to the William Randolph Hearst family, and they tortured her. They did some really bad stuff to her, but she came out of it with Stockholm syndrome and basically joined their group and started helping them rob banks and commit crimes. So I think it wasn't just the fact that there was this, and the Symbionese, the SLA killed some people. Interesting. By the way, side note, somewhat tying into some of our other stuff, including the stuff we might be doing in the next episode. They had a
Intent.
they had a symbol that was a seven-headed cobra. Oddly enough, it was based on the principles of Kwanzaa, because the Swahili, they have these Swahili principles that are of which there are seven, and it was he called it. Let's see what it says here. They claim that it was copied from the ancient Sri Lankan and Indian seven-headed Naga. Carved stones depicting a seven-headed cobra, commonly found near sluices of the ancient irrigation tanks in Sri Lanka. This particular graphic of the seven-headed cobra used by the SLA may have been copied from an illustration in a book called The Lost Continent of Mu by James Churchward. So they had kind of a mystical, and we have this pseudoscience lost continent stuff bubbling up in a way you wouldn't expect to see even in the 70s, basically. But anyway, this whole.
But yeah, that does fit because there are a number of women or young women in the terrorist group in the book.
Right.
In Nothing Lasts Forever.
Yes. Well,
so,
that's
yeah,
definitely.
That does make sense.
I feel like that's what they were thinking of, and I mean they committed some really brutal crimes. Like it's possible to understand where they're coming from. This group, they were trying to end U.S. imperialism. They felt that that. Like many groups at the time, they felt that black people were oppressed and had to be freed. We had to rise up against the oppressive patriarchy and white supremacy. But they were really brutal. And their leader was a guy who'd escaped from prison and was using it as an excuse to sort of rape and murder. And and I think there was a feeling of that this was a really senseless, brutal cadre of terrorists, and whatever their motivations, people didn't have a lot of sympathy for them. They were just a bunch of radical, nihilists running amok who wanted to commit actions. So that's probably what inspired the characters in Nothing Lasts Forever, I think, more than the terrorists. Leland's kind of a guy who, he can be sympathetic to the dispossessed, but these are just monsters who are using it as an excuse to commit acts of violence, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But that's definitely where that came out of. So there's a number of stuff that gets brought up politically throughout the book. The other big thing, and this is a change from the movie change from the book, it's set not in the Nakatomi building, but the Klaxon Oil building, which is clearly meant to be Exxon.
Marvel, at least the MCU has Roxxon.
Roxxon.
It's a recurring thing.
Yeah, exactly, and obviously they don't want to get sued, but
yeah.
But and the book just flatly goes out and says you're doing business with the military junta in Chile, which would have been Augusto Pinochet's junta, which is still beloved by some people on the right, but it was just blatantly a group of, people who, were willing to do business with monsters to make some money. And he very squarely pins the blame on these people and says these are evil. This is a really evil corporation, and here's why, because they're doing this, and it's barely fictional at that
including
point.
his daughter.
Yes,
His daughter, who is the executive. Oh, it's his daughter, not his wife, in the book,
right.
because his wife was dead by this point.
That's right. That's the other change. Instead of his wife being held hostage by the terrorists, it's his daughter, and he makes her much more culpable for the crimes of what's going on that the terrorists are responding to. I mentioned that the terrorists are not very sympathetic in the book, but he really does not hesitate to hold this company responsible for the kind of chaos that is being caused by these terrorists. And he says, my daughter is working in this company and she's been part of it. She is negotiating deals with evil, regimes around the world. What am I to think of that, basically? Um,
Yeah, and he also at the end, or just before the end, actually takes the money that Klaxon has gotten from this deal and throws it out the window.
right. Yeah. It's a bit of a Snake Plissken moment, actually, where it just is like, I saved everyone, but fuck you. I'm gonna throw this out the
Yeah,
window. I'll have to bleep that.
and he intentionally does it so that he can't be seen, so that even if they know it was him, they can't prove it.
Hmm. And even that imagery is essentially in the movie because it's bearer bonds rather than actual money in the movie. But they, if you remember the final scene or two in the movie, is these all the bearer bonds fluttering down, all carpeting the streets as everyone mills around. And
But
that
it wasn't John McClane who threw them out.
no, it wasn't.
That's
But
a big difference.
yeah, but they're going for that imagery basically of like
Yeah,
this money. But of course, in the movie, it doesn't have any symbolic impact because they haven't explicitly linked, what Nakatomi. They haven't accused Nakatomi of doing anything evil. They've focused very heavily on just it being a straightforward action movie, more or less. What do you think about that, Phil? What do you think about the fact that the movie is, very
Um, I think if they included some of the stuff from the book in the movie, it would have made it more muddled. The movie really works as a straightforward action movie.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I
so I mean, it's basically a perfect little action thing.
yeah. No, it's
Like
it's very
it's very
true.
like it does what it needs to do. You know?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like it's a very, I mean, it's not like the book is bloated either, but the movie is very, very, it's true that,
Straightforward.
yeah, it's very straightforward. It's actually a great example of how when we people say, oh, take politics out of it, um, that you're not really taking politics out of it. You're just reaffirming a certain baseline politics, essentially, because the end result is that the movie is more effectively conservative in its outlook,
Yeah,
without being like overtly, over the top about it. But the book
but it's
does,
very sort of Reaganite and very like one man taking responsibility for his family. You know?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's sort of, well, there are all these jerk ass cops and jerk ass federal agents in the movie, but there it's kind of like, yeah, the government, it's the government,
Yeah.
it's the
Or
bureaucrats.
the bureaucrats. Yeah, the
Exactly.
red tape.
Yeah, Dwayne Robinson, who's the character in both the book and the movie. That's his name in both, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The deputy police chief.
Deputy police chief, who is, of course, famously, he's the one who he's the chief who he's not literally John McClane's boss, but he fills the role of the chief that has to say, "Damn it, McClane, you're a loose cannon. You're causing all these problems."
Yeah.
He does that role essentially, and
Um,
whereas the
in the
beat,
book, his ending is much hard. I mean, in the book ends with the same thing with Carl, the terrorist, attacking the main character,
mm-hmm,
and Al Powell, the cop who's younger in the book,
mm-hmm,
shooting him.
mm-hmm.
But in the book, Powell actually shoves his commanding officer in front of the hail of bullets first.
Right. Yeah, that's right. He dies in the book, Dwayne Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I was surprised at that moment because it's such a silly 80s action movie moment where the guy comes bursting out of the building after you think everything's over, but no, I'm still alive and I'm here to get you. And so there's a big dramatic moment. But that is in the book. And it's there mostly so Dwayne Robinson could get killed because he's such a huge in the in both the book and the movie. But in the movie, it's always
Yeah.
it's a little bit it's a little bit contrived in the movie, I think, because like at one point he's trying to say, "Oh, there's no terrorists, it's everything's okay," and Al Powell goes, "But a body fell out the
Oh
window."
yeah, they take way too long to admit that there's a problem.
Yeah, and he goes, "Ah, it's some stockbroker who got depressed," which is one of the things that's always made me go, "I'm not sure I can really buy into this movie." Yeah. No, anyway, but yeah, Dwayne, he's more described in the book as just being a bureaucrat who's worried about his career, whereas in the movie he's just kind of a dick for no reason. I mean,
Yeah, well, in the book also he's lumped in with Nixon as one of the reasons for why society's crumbling. So
right, exactly. Um, it's
it says they were spoilers of society as much as all the little Tonys who had ever lived,
right.
with Richard Nixon at the top of the list. Because of them, civilization ceased to etc.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I say, the book is, and it shows how if you just take it out a bit and rejigger it a bit, it becomes a very reactionary story. But Thorpe is very eager not to play that game. Basically, he's eager to.
There's also an implication that Leland is doing the wrong thing. You know, his whole campaign to take out the terrorists might have caused things to get worse than they would have been otherwise.
Um,
Sort of at the end, just a little bit, like he muses that if he had just stayed on his flight, or that his limo breaking down was a sign that he should have not come here, that sort of thing.
it's true, but I don't know. I mean, it's
Little bit of, like, it's not
go
fully,
ahead.
but it's there's a little bit of a hint there that maybe
Well,
he's
I mean,
not
it's hard not to
really
get.
in the right here.
I mean, as I say, he's very much like, oh yeah, society's got all kinds of mess. His attitude is pretty clearly politically that there's all these bureaucrats and there's all these jerks and they're dragging everyone down and trying to hurt everyone, and that it's their fault that people push back and become these psychotic nihilists. And so but he doesn't like the psychotic nihilists, but he's pinning their evolution or the fact that they've come out of society on people like that, rather than just saying, oh, it's all these crazy nihilists and who knows what they want. Like he does briefly talk about, well, they're responding to some of the oppression and inequality in society, but then they put psychos in charge, and it's very clear that Tony Gruber in the book, he likes to just kill people. He's not doing it because he's
Yeah, he has a signature move where what was it, pinning on the black?
the black boutonniere,
I
yeah,
can't.
the red or
Yeah,
yeah, the black boutonniere,
where he adjusts somebody's tie and then shoots them in the chest
yeah,
or
he
in the lapel.
shoots them through the lapel, so they get a red flower on their chest, basically, the black boutonniere.
Yeah.
But and he makes it really like, yeah, but this guy's just a psycho. His ideology is almost beside the point. He's a little Stalin, basically, where yeah, I'm fighting for freedom, but I also like to just kill people, basically.
Mm.
But when you talk about, oh yeah, it would have been better if he had stayed home. That is a really interesting idea. What if it's the same thing people say about Indiana Jones? What if he hadn't gone anywhere? Like if he hadn't participated in this at all, would everything have been okay? But in this case, like it's very clear that Gruber would have started just killing people. Like he would have.
Yeah, but I mean, his daughter dies anyway in the book.
It's true, but I mean, to me, the
That's a
argument
big
is
change, by the way. The
yes.
Oh, sorry. I'll
Spoiler.
just describe the scene. It's sorry.
No, it's okay. No,
We already
it's
said
okay.
the ending.
We're gonna talk about the book, so we're gonna spoil it.
Yeah. So it's much like the movie scene where Gruber is holding it's Holly in the movie, I think, hostage, and John McClane ends up saving her because he has a gun taped to his back.
Right.
And
the gun taped to his back is in the
the
book, by the way. That
yeah,
whole scene
it's in
is
the book,
basically as written in the book.
except McClane manages to reach her when Gruber tries to drag her down with him.
Right.
And in the book, he doesn't make it, and she just falls.
Right. He actually specifically says in the book, Stephanie, her name's Stephanie, and as we say, it's his daughter. He says, Stephanie, move, but she doesn't move fast enough. So he shoots Gruber, and Gruber's able to grab hold of her and throw them both off the building. So his daughter dies. Um, Whereas in the movie, they specifically, she does move when he says move, or he makes the indication that she should move, basically, and she moves, and that gets her far enough away from him that he can shoot him, and he goes over the side. So, and that honestly, that is a good change for the movie. Like, there's no reason to end the book on such a down note to me. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's also the implication that he might die from his injuries in the book.
Yeah, yeah, he's
which
kind
is
of
pretty strong.
he's taken so much of a hit. Um,
Yeah, like he walks through glass and all the stuff in the movie,
mhm.
but he seems to be in much worse shape than Bruce Willis was at the end of that thing.
Well, yeah, Leland is older than McClane.
Yeah,
Leland is in his late 50s at that point. He fought in World War
I think
II.
so. Yeah.
He fought in World War II, so he would have had to have been at least in his 50s, late 50s. And he does talk about how, oh yeah, I'm in good shape for an old guy. And of course, again, he wrote that with the intention that Frank Sinatra would play the character. So, you kind of assume, Sinatra would have been if not older, at that scene. So again, it's almost, and you do have to admire Die Hard, the movie, even as it was made. Bruce Willis never does anything, superhuman in that movie, right? It's all stuff that a reasonably, in shape guy could do, right? He doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't do any karate kicks. He dangles over some ledges, and he has to, flip himself into from some heights. Those are the big stunts that he does, and he gets into a big fight with Carl at one point. But it's all
Yeah, I mean he's competent but not superhuman.
right.
Unlike what the sequels look like, which I haven't seen any of the Die Hard sequels. I don't think they should exist.
Yeah, I don't remember
I
in
mean,
part two if he's a super kung fu guy, but there's some pretty outrageous stuff in part two for sure. Part three was generally lauded for going back to vaguely plausible and also having a plausible reason to happen, whereas the second one is just, oh, and he stumbles into some more terrorists, like, oh, come on, like twice in a row.
oh yeah,
And the
I
third,
saw a sketch from the Ben Stiller show of Die Hard in a grocery store
right.
or a convenience store or something. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, he turns to the camera and says, "How can the same thing keep happening to one guy?"
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what
Um,
that was the mockery of the second one all throughout the
yeah, but I saw the trailers for some of the later ones, and
yeah.
like he's jumping
Oh, yeah.
up, and like they have glass on the floor, and it doesn't seem to bother him anymore.
Right. No, the third one is the third one is the only sequel that's really any worthwhile because I don't think there's anything insanely implausible in that one either. Maybe a little bit, but not, again, within range of what a human being could do. But they also find a reason for it to be John McClane and not just he just doesn't stumble into something. He's specifically drawn in because of what he's gone through in the previous books, or the previous movies. But yeah, I mean, like the fourth one was like, he's causing cars to flip into helicopters, and it's just nonsense.
Yeah,
And it's exactly the opposite of, again, that's what Die Hard was actually meant to be pushing back against to a degree. It still doesn't look anywhere near, like, to modernize it still seems like an overbloated 80s action movie, but they were definitely trying to like ramp it down a bit from Arnold Schwarzenegger when they made the movie.
yeah.
That was part of the point. But anyway, it's the book is just one last thing about the book. Like I said, there's a very
Oh, I had something about Al Powell, but it's mostly a movie thing.
yeah. Well, he's aged up in the movie, oddly.
Yeah, he's played by Carl Winslow
Right.
from Family Matters.
Reginald Val Johnson. Yes.
That's what I knew him as when I saw the movie.
Yeah, yeah. And he's
and he's a cop there too.
yeah.
So
well, in that
that amused me.
and he's in the book. He's
But-
very explicitly. Oh, he's the ally. There, actually, I kind of want to talk about Taco Bill too in the book.
Oh yeah, what was his deal?
Well,
I didn't quite understand what was going
well,
on there.
it was kind of, he's meant to sort of represent, I think, oh, there's a free American spirit out there. So basically, in the book, a ham radio operator who calls himself Taco Bill hacks in.
Who can't say why he's called that because there might be children listening.
That's what he says. Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's able to basically. I believe that's the first guy Leland's able to reach on the CB. as opposed to in the movie where he's able to get a hold of a
No, I think Taco
oh
Bill was later.
oh well
I think he did talk to Powell first. I'm not sure,
well
but I think so.
he's able to listen in on their CB basically, and he's not and he helps them he helps them a little I think, but he's mostly just a guy who keeps he's some kind of weirdo cowboy who keeps coming in. All right, brother, we're all rooting for you here. And Leland even kind of says, hey, Bill, you should shut up. You're just making things worse.
Yeah.
but he is sort of meant to be a morale booster. They basically combine him into Al Powell in the movie. He's
And also, to a lesser degree, Argyle, the limo driver.
right. Argyle, the limo driver.
There is a limo driver in the book, but he's barely anything.
That's right. There's a scene with a limo driver in the book.
I think he's described as black as well, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a scene with a limo driver in the book that he encounters the limo driver during a changeover flight before he arrives in Los Angeles, and they have he pulls a gun on a guy who is threatening the limo driver, which is kind of over the top. In the movie, he gets turned into something who's actually relevant to the plot in the movie, which was actually well done. And again, he's kind of there to show that Joe Leland's a good guy and he respects the working class guy and a black guy who's in his, But Al Powell in the book is a
oh yeah, there's a line in the book which was well-meaning, but geez, where he said, like most black people, he had a gift of speech or something like that.
Yeah, he's it's the 70s
weird.
Old guy view of things.
Yeah.
But again, trying to be
enough.
enlightened and decent, but not being able to stop being an old guy from 30 years ago. And it is interesting because Al Powell in the book he's actually more of a character in the movie. Everything is very much from the point of view of Leland. You never cut away from Leland to see what the cops are talking about on the ground. You only hear them through the CB. And Powell is very much here's one sane, decent human being in the world who can help me. And he's a young cop, and it's I guess because he's young and he's black, he's not part of the corrupt police system as much as everyone else is the implication, basically. Whereas he's much more of a fallible human being in the movie, essentially. He's still...
And the subplot where he shot a kid, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah, that did not play... Watching it, I'm like, oh boy. That's not a great look.
And his arc is learning to shoot somebody again.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's like, it was good that he was a desk jockey and his wife was pregnant. That was a good place for him to be. Anyway. But I think, we're hitting the limits here of where we're at. But anyway, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, it was, this isn't something I'd normally read because it's way out of genres I'm usually interested in.
Mm-hmm.
But I have liked Die Hard for a while, and it's an interesting companion piece. I don't know if it's better or worse than the movie. It's interesting. If you like the movie, I think it's worth reading just to get a different perspective on it.
Yeah, it is really interesting how, usually when Hollywood gets hold of a book like this, they'll make all kinds of changes. And this is, there's some major changes, but all the big beats are here and all the main sort of plot is here, essentially.
Tying a hose around him to jump off a building.
Crawling into the vent. Blowing stuff up, blowing stuff up.
The vent thing in the...
Yeah.
It was, remember The Middleman, the TV show?
I never saw it, no.
Okay, well, there was a joke that there were Nakatomi laws, that all buildings had to have man-sized vents.
Right.
And they said it was based on the real-life events that inspired the movie Die Hard. So.
Well, that's what the book is, apparently. It was Joe Leland in real life. Yes, we should comment on the fact that in the book he says Geronimo, whereas... Yeah,
which is said in the movie, but it's very downplayed. He says it before he drops a bomb, but nobody remembers that because of Yippee-ki-yay,
right,
which is a big line, and is, of course, repeated later by Hans Gruber.
Right. Yeah, it's and it's true to the book in a sense, but it's not actually in the book, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. And also some of Bruce Willis talking to himself. Like I said earlier, in the book, Leland is very methodical. Mm-hmm. He doesn't talk much. There's I have a machine gun.
Yes,
that's right. In the movie,
that whole scene.
In the book, it was we have a machine gun now.
Right.
Because he was trying to make them think that there were more than one of him around.
Right, he was trying to throw them off. He doesn't write ho ho ho, but I mean that scene is really very close to the book. That's the funny thing. I wasn't that seems like such an '80s action movie scene. I wasn't expecting it to be in the book, but it is. So yeah, that's a good example. They tweaked the details a little, but it really is in some ways a very faithful adaptation of the book.
One more thing: Canadian connections. In The Detective, at least the movie, the person who Leland sends away to the electric chair for the murder is Canadian.
Yeah,
it turns out he's innocent. That's part. Yeah, he's from Toronto, so
hooray!
I don't know. In Die Hard, one of the terrorist groups that Hans Gruber pretends that he wants released were from a Quebecois
FLQ.
separatist group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember if they're actually the Fonds de Libération de Québec, but they're a Quebec terrorist.
Clearly based on that.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. There are some Canadian connections to Die Hard. Anyway, just a word of caution. Like I say, I really did not care for The Detective. It was a very navel-gazing book that I don't think has a lot of appeal to anyone. Whereas Nothing Lasts Forever is a real breezy read. If you enjoy Die Hard, absolutely read Nothing Lasts Forever.
Oh, and it says the ending of The Detective in the first couple chapters.
That's right. Yeah, he basically
not missing anything.
That's right. In the first chapter or two, he just basically explains the plot of The Detective, all the stuff that happens. Because I have to admit, I stopped reading The Detective at page 400, and then I was just reading the end of The Detective. I'm like, or reading the first chapter or two of Nothing Lasts Forever. I'm like, okay, well now I know what happened. So, as the sun sets over Los Angeles, and we've decided there are no more worlds to conquer, so I'm Lieutenant Adam Prosser, the chief who's been stuck behind a desk too long and who's forgotten what it's like on the streets. And as always, with me is Phil Rice, a loose cannon who gets results, damn it! Thanks, as always, to Alex Ross.
You're off the case!
You're off the...
No, that's the wrong one. Never mind.
Well, he would be off the case if they'd put him on the case in the first place. So thanks as always to Alex Ross, head of Klaxon Oil, and the theme song was by pirate radio broadcaster Jack Furyk. Just a reminder, to anyone listening to this, TCAF in Toronto is coming up, and Phil and I will be there, although we're not going to have a table, but some of our contributors to Strange Romance will have tables. I believe Melissa Capriglione is going to have a table. So watch for us if you're in Toronto in the first weekend of May. We'll be there.
Yep.
And check out our comics as always online on Comixology under Phantasmic Tales. You can also check out Phil's The Apex Society, Undead, Halloween Girl, and various other things.
Undeath, and that's just an arc in the Apex Society. We'll keep going over this.
I know, but let's say Undeath. It does have a different name, so we're gonna call that.
Yeah.
We're gonna call it Undeath. Okay, so the Apex Society. Anything else you want to plug, Phil?
Nope.
We're good. Okay. So to all the modern cowboys out there fighting corruption and the death of the American dream, thanks and a Merry Christmas to all.